we pause this moment to reclaim the beauty deep within and beyond these walls that carry us through the week. For all manner of people are here today, the faithful, the fearful, the heartbroken, the hopeful. May we recognize all of these truths and the story in lives other than our own. For together we have truths, and together we share a common story. In the spirit of gathering, of learning, of loving, and of loving, we kindle our chalice flame this day. Come, let us worship together. To sing or not to sing? That is the question. Alas, we have reviewed the guidelines for indoor singing, and they would still suggest that we continue not to sing hymns indoors collectively just yet, but there are many ways to participate in the song. Rising in body or spirit as you are now, to hum, to sway, to feel it in your bones. The opening hymn, Where Do We Come From? What are we and where are we going? This is the question that is at the heart of our worship.
Where do we come from? What are we? Where are we going? Where do we come from? Mystery, mystery. Life is a riddle and a mystery. Where do we come from? Where are we going? Where do we come from? What are we? Where are we going? Where do we come from? Mystery, mystery. Life is a mystery. Where do we go? Where are we going? Where do we come from? What are we? Where are we going? Where do we come from? Life is a riddle and a mystery. Mystery, mystery. Life is a riddle and a mystery.
Good morning. My name is Michael Kohler, and I'm your worship associate this morning. Welcome to our live, in-person, and long-distance worship here at All Souls Church, where our name says it all. where we seek to create a community where all people, people of all races, creeds, sexual orientations, gender expressions, and ability, where all people are welcome. In a world of division, our mission here at All Souls is to build what Dr. King called the beloved community, a spirit-filled, justice-seeking community that bears witness to the unity of the human family. We invite you to join us on this journey of faith and hope. We also extend a special welcome to our visitors and guests and all those who may be joining us for the first time. For those in the building, you can access your order of service with the QR code in the pew with your phone. And those who choose not to use their phone, make sure you have a printed order of service available to you, or ask an usher if you didn't get one when you entered. And for those watching on Zoom, your order of service can be found in the chat. Now, it's important for us to recognize the people who lived on the land where our church stands. The closest village was the Nakonchak, from which the name Anacostio is derived. They were part of the Piscataway group of First Nations people on this land. We acknowledge that Indigenous people were here before us, are here with us now, and will continue to be with us as we look into the future. Let's take a moment of silence to reflect on whose land we each reside in our many locations around the US and planet Earth. Thank you. We've heard that many of you missed the chance to get up and greet one another during our beholding time. We've also heard that many of you are pretty grateful for the safe COVID protocols or conservative COVID protocols we have in place. So we wanted to try a little bit different today. When our beholding music comes, feel free to stand up, move around a bit, and if you see somebody you know, maybe give them an elbow pump or a gajou, like this, or as the Sufis do with one hand on your heart, and as a way to appreciate each other. And if you feel like you want to keep your distance a little bit, just signal that by bowing and by taking a little step back. And for those of us on Zoom, feel free to switch on your cameras, greet one another, and smile and wave, and be sure that we'll be connecting with you out there too. So please be with one another.
Good morning, All Souls. I'm Dolores Miller, the Director of Religious Education. The All Souls theme for October is Facing Fear and Finding Courage. Mr. Bobbin, Irene's father, was a tailor. He had just finished sewing a gown for the Duchess to wear at the palace party that evening.
It's beautiful, Papa.
Thank you. You know, I'm not feeling well, and I'm not sure that I have the strength to deliver it.
I can do it.
You can't. There's a storm outside.
I can do it.
Well, be safe, Dumpling.
So Irene set out to start on her journey to deliver the gown. Soon the storm came up. The wind blew wildly. It tore the dress right out of Irene's arms. But she pressed on. She just had to tell the Duchess what happened to her father's beautiful creation. And just as the palace came into view, Irene spotted the gown stuck on a tree.
The little silkworms that made silk for that doll just made that much silk and then crawled in the ground. 'Cause they're never
She's here!
The Duchess and her friends were so relieved and happy to see Irene.
Oh, great! Oh, thank you, my dear. Thank you. It's beautiful. It's beautiful.
You're courageous.
We're so happy you're safe.
Here's some hot chocolate. Yum.
After warming up and eating a delicious meal, Irene had a fun and dry ride in the palace carriage, home to where she and her papa were so happy to be together again.
and the world seemed to smile all around. Oh, it wouldn't be mother, it made us just quite my brother. My sweet little all is true.
Oh my gosh, those stories are like the COVID bonus prize. We used to play those at staff meeting just for like a vitamin pill of excitement. All right, hello. I'm Reverend Louise Green. I'm your Minister of Congregational Care. And I just want to add my welcome. I'm so glad you're here today. If you are new or new-ish, we really want you to feel welcome. If you're on Zoom, you can come to coffee hour, have a breakout room with Gary, our Director of Membership, and then just hear more about All Souls and Unitarian Universalism. If you're here and just want some questions while flying under the radar, you can talk to somebody in the back, and we will not try to capture you, I promise. There is also a class to explore membership on Wednesday evenings, October 20th and 27th. So contact Gary Penn if you're interested. You can come to these two classes to explore membership. It doesn't mean that you're like ready when you arrive, although some of you may be, because you've been here 17 years perhaps and would like to join now. So we welcome all of you. This Wednesday is the next We Connect Wednesdays. They're every week now from 7:30 to 8:30 on Zoom, every week. 7:30, 8:30 on Zoom. You don't register, you just go on the calendar, you hit the link, and you're in for some kind of restorative hour. This week, it's part of Story Year 200. We'll be telling stories all year long, and our theme is similar to what you'll hear today. Tell me a story about a time you faced your fears and found your courage. Our big campaign, Imagining Our Future, kicked off yesterday. This is a church-wide project to reunite with each other, to set some new church goals, and to take the next step in designing the search for the next settled senior minister. To be part of the process, you just attend one small group workshop, just one. It's 2.5 hours, but just one. And the workshops continue through the month of October. So it's Tuesdays and Thursdays on Zoom at 6:45 or in person in the dining room downstairs on Saturdays at 10. You don't have to remember everything. It's on the website. Look for the little steeple icon, and please sign up. You don't have to have been here forever. We just want to hear from everyone. The UUA Commission on Social Witness is a thing that arises out of the UUA General Assembly. And they will present 4 excellent issue panels on 2 Wednesdays, this Wednesday the 6th, and also the 13th from 7 to 9. There's full information in the weekly bulletin, but what happens is these social witness things are passed, and then we are asked to think about them on the way to next General Assembly to reflect and learn. So 2 members of All Souls will be presenters in the panels this week. Shige Sakurai is on the panel discussing defend and advocate with transgender, non-binary, and intersex communities. And then Min Choi from the READ Project is on the other panel, stop voter suppression and partner for voting rights in a multiracial democracy. So we wish them both well, and we just appreciate their good work and the social justice action from All Souls that radiates into the denomination. We turn now to those names and situations that are on your mind today. So we're going to take a moment just to bring those into your heart in silence here or by typing into the chat and just holding those people and places in your awareness. This is our time for shared meditation and prayer. We are thinking our condolences still remain with Jim's wife, James Lowen's wife, Susan, children Lucy and Nicholas, sister Mary, and many grandchildren. And a memorial service for that member, James Lowen, will be held next Saturday, October 9th at 10:30 here in the sanctuary and streaming on Zoom. We need you to register to attend in person, or you can just go into the link if you're online. Yesterday brought 20,000 people to the streets of Washington for interfaith worship and the Rally for Abortion Justice. Yes. And there were 650 events nationally organized by the Women's March and allied organizations. So we appreciate the presence of so many from All Souls, and we thank you for your strong witness at the marches here and around the country, because some of you on Zoom may have been out there in other places. And so turning to prayer for a moment, our hearts are with all of us who have struggled with unexpected pregnancy. For those of us who have experienced a life-threatening pregnancy. For any of us who had to make the difficult decision to end a pregnancy or pondering this right now. We mourn with women in Texas and other states who are feeling desperate in the face of restrictions that force them to travel for abortion service. and our prayers remain for safe, comprehensive, and accessible reproductive health care for all. Maybe so. October 2nd was the birth anniversary of Mahatma Gandhi as well. This is celebrated in India as a national holiday. We honor Gandhi's life, and the words of our meditation today come from him. He reflects on ahimsa, which is generally translated very narrowly as nonviolence. But ahimsa is a concept in Sanskrit that represents this deep, ongoing choice to live a life of love in all things, no exceptions. So please take a moment to move into reflection and listening. Gandhiji said, "If someone with courage and vision can rise to lead in nonviolent action, the winter of despair can, in the twinkling of an eye, be turned into the summer of hope." Nonviolence, ahimsa, is not a garment to put on and off at will. Its seat is in the heart, and it must be an inseparable part of our being. Nonviolence, which is the quality of the heart, cannot come by an appeal to the brain. It is a plant of slow growth, growing imperceptibly but surely. May this grow in each of our lives and blossom into the courage of action taken in love. Amen.
Wings
For all those names and situations, named and unnamed, we hold together in our hearts, in our sacred circle today. Blessed be. Our reading today is a litany of survival, which was written by Audre Lorde, who at the time created, I think, an iconic piece on survival as a Black lesbian feminist writer. And now this reading has really expanded. To me, it represents the experience of being a queer person, watching your back in the world. To so many, it represents how to navigate with fear into courage. For those of us who live at the shoreline, standing upon the constant edges of decision, crucial and alone. For those of us who cannot indulge the passing whims of choice. Misquote, the passing dreams of choice. Seeking a now that can breed futures like bread in our children's mouths, so their dreams will not reflect the death of ours. For those of us who were imprinted with fear like a faint line in the center of our foreheads, learning to be afraid with our mother's milk, for by this weapon, this illusion of some safety to be found, the heavy-footed hope to silence us. For all of us, this instant and this triumph, we were never meant to survive. And when the sun rises, we are afraid it might not remain. When the sun sets, we are afraid it might not rise again in the morning. When our stomachs are full, we are afraid of indigestion. When our stomachs are empty, we are afraid we may never eat again. When we are loved, we are afraid love will vanish. And when we are alone, we are afraid love will never return. And when we speak, we are afraid our words will not be heard or welcomed. But when we are silent, we are still afraid. So it is better to speak, remembering we were never meant to survive.
Thank you, Reverend Louise, for that beautiful reading of that very important poem. All souls near and far, it is so good to be with you today. And I just have to say, I heard that the beholding time, the time of greeting one another was a near and dear tradition of All Souls, and now I know why. I think we're going to keep it, just to let you know. Yeah. It's fun. So those of you who have been coming for a while know that each month, as you've heard, we start with a new thematic focus. And some of you may also remember that this year we're framing that focus in terms of stories. Tell me a story. So we're looking at this. I imagine this as like you're sitting around a big bonfire and we lean into each other and we say, tell me a story about a time in your life when you faced your fears and found your courage. Well, I have my own story to tell you today that I'm going to weave in and out of this sermon. But before I do that, I want to tell you how I came up with the title for today's sermon, which is The Courage to Fear. Now, that title's a bit of a paradox, isn't it? Sometimes I think of these titles and then later it's like, why did I do that? Well, we usually think of courage and fear as opposites, but it was inspired by a line from a hymn and the story behind that hymn, a hymn which many of us know, perhaps many of us love, Amazing Grace, written by John Newton. Newton was a captain in the slave trade who, when faced with possible drowning in a storm that threatened his ship, promised God that if he and his ship were spared, he would become a true believer, a true Christian. And his promise led to his eventual conversion from slave trader to abolitionist. Now, Newton's full story has to be a topic for some other time, because today I just want to look at 2 lines from the hymn. The first being, "'Twas grace that taught my heart to fear." Now, I reject the theology that says the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, because that's not the God that I know. But nevertheless, I took the line from the song as a kind of koan, a spiritual riddle for this sermon, and it gave me the challenge found in the title. What does it mean to have the courage to fear? And what does it take, and why does it take courage to feel your fear? So, to begin to answer that, let me tell you the beginning of my own story. One morning, I was running on a deserted road flanked by 2 tall cornfields. It was just before dawn, so it was pretty dark. As I rounded a corner, I saw a car that was sitting by the side of the road with its engine idling and the lights turned off. Earlier that summer, there had been a series of media stories about women who went out for a run and never returned. So I felt my heart race and my stomach tighten. At that moment, I wasn't sure what I was going to do. So October seems like a good month to explore the theme of facing fear and finding courage. Daylight is lessening, darkness is growing, Halloween is coming. The decorations are already up. I've often thought that Halloween serves a psychological purpose as a way of facing our fears by actualizing them. Are you like me and you can't stand spiders? Well, put them around your house as decorations, right? Or are you afraid of monsters? Become one. If you can see the tangible reality of your fear, then maybe you can begin to address it. But here's the hard thing about fears. They are invisible, and they live in us and around us in ways that we can't actualize. So look, I got to name the biggest fear that has haunted this globe since 2019, this invisible virus that can be spread by sneezing or speaking or singing. And this fear has changed our lives. It's changed our worship. It's changed how we are permitted to interact with one another. Now, I know from talking with many of you that we are all in different places about our level of fear about regathering. So my words today are not meant to provide an easy panacea that says, buck up, the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. But rather, I want to look at the spiritual cost of living in fear and then ask ourselves, what does it mean to have the courage to fear? Well, let's go back to my story for a minute. Should I run past that car or turn around and go back? Going back would add time, and I was getting tired. So I instinctively reached in my pocket for the tiny can of pepper spray I usually carry with me when I run, but I'd forgotten it. And then I checked the other pocket for my Swiss Army knife, something I often carry. It's a very handy tool. You never know when you're going to need a Swiss Army knife. And then I remembered it was sitting on the kitchen counter right next to my cell phone. I couldn't help remembering one time as I was heading out and grabbing my pepper spray and knife that my husband asked me, "What do you need those things for?" And at that moment, I realized we inhabited two different worlds. As a white, able-bodied man, he has always been able to walk through this world with a certain degree of confidence that he would not be harassed verbally or physically. Most women, however, know what I'm talking about, as do most persons who inhabit Black, brown, indigenous, Asian, Pacific Islander, trans, or genderqueer bodies. To inhabit those bodies means that you live with a certain amount of caution, if not outright fear, for your physical safety. But even if you have never experienced harassment or violence personally, you likely carry within your body the memory of your ancestors who have. And that collective fear lives in our bodies. And next Sunday, in part 2 of this sermon, The Courage to Feel, I'm going to take up that theme in more depth. Fear lives in our bodies, but it starts in our brains, in that amygdala, in the reptilian brain, when activated and reinforced through memory, through generational trauma, and by the constant barrages of stories of danger, means that it is often difficult for us to dial down our fears. It takes courage to acknowledge that fear. And yet, here's the paradox. Doing so can help us live a life that is not fearful, but faithful. Because by doing so as a spiritual practice, we develop the stamina and the strength to do hard things, things that we're afraid of. And somehow on that road, between those two cornfields, I felt that. But by now, I was in full panic mode. I felt so vulnerable. I thought about how easy it would be to drag me into that cornfield. I thought about how much I still wanted to do with my life. I told myself how silly and irrational I was being, that I didn't want my life to be ruled by fear. So slowly, I started jogging towards the car. We already know how powerful a force fear can be and how it can affect our personal and political life. The success, if you could call it that, of the previous administration's weaponization of fear manipulated a vast swath of the population. The attacks on the Capitol on January 6th motivated and rooted in fear. This draconian law restricting access to abortion in Texas, coupled with the encouragement to sue anyone who aids and abets a person getting an abortion, is motivated in part by fear. And I'm just going to say it, fear from men in positions of power who fear that they are losing control over women's bodies. It was really good to be at the march yesterday with thousands and thousands of people. Yes, manipulation by fear works because we humans too often don't have the courage to acknowledge that fear inside of ourselves and then challenge that fear when we look at it more deeply. So what's really going on here? How is my fear involved with a real threat, and how much is involved with not only physical survival, but really more our sense of identity or ego survival? How much of it is a suspicion of the unknown? This is where faith can help us. But before we get to faith, I was getting closer to that car now. And as I looked harder, I could see that there were 2 people in the car instead of 1. They were shadowy figures still. One was behind the steering wheel, and the other one was taller, sitting in the passenger seat. And then at this point, the car began to move very slowly, inching along. Why was this car going so slow? Why is it moving towards me? Amygdala brain triggered. Fight, flight, freeze, which one? Once again, I started to imagine the worst. Fear is invisible, but it is also instructive. Fear, when not experienced as a knee-jerk reaction to an emotional flood of feelings, can be our teacher. So one thing I do as your interim minister is to listen to your stories about your church and to identify the feelings and the fears that surface in those stories. I've heard from some of you a very real fear that you have regarding the Sunday morning worship experience. The fear is that what you have known and loved is gone forever. That what we're doing right now will become the new normal. And you don't like it. You miss so many of the things that were satisfying to you. But I want to remind you something that the poet Rilke once wisely wrote. He said, "No feeling is final." And that is true for our fears as well. What we're doing right now will likely not be what's happening in 6 months or even this time next year. I've also heard stories that you have some fears about exploring your history during this 200th anniversary, torn between wanting to be both celebrative of your past, but concerned about the pain that may arise from revisiting past traumatic times as we talk about and explore and name your history. So what I see us doing together this year is indeed celebrating and, yes, building the capacity for truth-telling, because when we face a fear directly, you rob it of its power. When you face a fear directly, you rob it of its power. So by now, the sun was almost up. It was up over the cornfields. I picked up my pace. I came a little closer. I was almost now parallel to the car. I was preparing to pass it, and I looked into the driver's window, and I could see 2 small hands gripping the top of the steering wheel. The driver was a teenage girl who looked utterly terrified. And the shadowy figure next to her, her father, I presume, who was gesturing for her to move forward, to put her foot on the gas, and at that moment she did, and the car lurched forward and then stopped. And I saw her put her head down on the steering wheel, and her dad looking alternately annoyed and sympathetic. And I remembered my own first time behind the wheel of a car and how I felt when I put my foot on the gas. I felt a surge of both power and fear. I will never learn to drive, I thought to myself. I will certainly kill someone. And I remember my dad sitting there, patiently telling me to just go easy, a little bit at a time, until you get the hang of it. That seems like good advice for driving a car and for life, wouldn't you say? Just go easy, a little bit at a time, until you get the hang of it. When I feel fear rising up in me, I'm also aware of its twin, which oddly enough is not courage, but grace. And there's that other couplet in the Newton's hymn, "'Twas grace that taught my heart to fear, and grace my fears relieved." I don't think of courage as a feeling like fear. It's assessing risk and moving cautiously, sometimes boldly, towards that which I fear. But there is grace in honestly acknowledging our fears, and there is grace in engaging them with courage. For John Newton, this amazing grace was a free and unmerited favor of God, releasing him from the dangers, toils, and snares of his own sin. Now, we may not preach that theology, but in this church, we preach something more important than that. We preach that we are responsible for the grace we give each other, grace that we don't have to earn, but that we deserve because we share a common humanity. Grace is the compassion we extend both to ourselves and to one another when we acknowledge our fears. Grace is the compassion that we extend to one another when we mess up, or we say or do the wrong thing. It's just like that dad sitting with his terrified daughter, his presence telling her, you're gonna be all right. You're gonna be all right. For John Newton, it took years for the Christian faith that he professed after his life was saved from drowning to see the common humanity he shared with the slaves that he had brought to America. For us, no matter whether our faith includes a Christian confession or a humanist conviction, whether we pray, meditate, or work for justice, the Unitarian Universalist faith we share tells us that we don't have time to live in fear. We don't have the decades that John Newton took to see that slavery was evil. We don't have any more decades to live in gridlock around life-saving legislation on immigration reform and accessible health care. We need our legislators to make those reforms now. And we don't have decades to wallow in our fears about changing our ways that we live in order to slow the degradation of our climate, of our planet. We have to get past the fear of being less comfortable and make those changes now. When Audre Lorde says it is better to speak remembering we were never meant to survive, she is reminding us of something really important, that in this one precious life we are given, we have too much to do to be paralyzed by our own fears. So having the courage to face fear together is an act of faith, and having that kind of faith is an amazing grace, because it's a faith in each other. It's a faith in the life we share that is bigger than all of us. So I ask you not to forget this, that it's a fear that makes us afraid of the stranger, and faith that makes us remember we once were one. And it's fear that keeps us from stepping off that ledge, but it's faith that keeps us grounded. And it's fear that makes us want to fight, flight, or freeze, but it is faith that makes us want to fly. So I say to you this year, let's fly, all souls. Let's fly.
Virtual church has been difficult for me. I spent most of my work week on Zoom, and the barrier for joining any non-related Zoom sessions is huge for me, even for my most loved activities. That's why I'm so happy that we're here together exploring re-entry. My Zoom fatigue has kept me from attending most Sunday worship since the start of the pandemic. And it has given me an opportunity to explore what All Souls means to me beyond worship. So here are the three things on which I landed. First, All Souls is dear memories for me of deep spiritual experiences I've had during worship prior to the pandemic, and they are still resonant in my body. I still get goosebumps when I recall moments where I was moved to tears here in the sanctuary by the music, the silence, the sermons, the community, the Spirit. Second, All Souls is the people. It's so meaningful for me to be connected with those dear friends that I've made here in this community. And third, maybe most importantly, All Souls continued to be a space for learning and growing, holding and being held in smaller groups. While I skipped worship, what I didn't miss was workshops and Vespers. Reverend Louise's wonderful class on spiritual practices was just such a blessing earlier this year. Thank you so much for that. These small groups were one of my favorite things here. They are one of my favorite things. That's why I'm part of the facilitation team for the Imagine Our Future workshop, which I hope you'll all join if you haven't signed up yet. And that spiritual experience, community, and learning, that is why I continue to give to All Souls, and I hope you do too. You can do this by clicking on the link in the chat if you're joining us on Zoom, or scan the barcode or click the donate button in your digital order of service. The offering will now be received.
Please rise and join in by humming or moving for our closing hymn.
How sweet the sound
I will bring some aspect of All Souls Past into the service. I leave you now with the words spoken at the end of the Board of Trustees meetings, but often used by the Reverend David Eaton, who says, "Keep alert, stand firm in your faith, be courageous, be strong. Let all that you do be done in love." May it be so. Blessed be. And as we leave our sanctuary, we will go outside to hear the choir. For those of us watching on Zoom, please enjoy listening to the same piece of music heard on your computers.
Our choral anthems for today lend themselves to quiet space, sometimes fearful space. But 16th Street will never be space for that, so we hope that together we can create that space. Our anthems this morning, the first one is If There Are Words by Keith Arnold. And the second is based on the beautiful Wendell Berry text, The Peace of Wild Things by Corey Silver. just in case we are foiled again by a bus. The text for the piece of Wild Things. When despair for the world grows in me, and I wake in the night at the least sound in fear of what my life and children's lives may be. I go lie down where the wood drake rests in his beauty on the water and the great heron feeds. I come into the peace of wild things who do not tax their lives with forethought of grief. I come into the presence of still water, and I feel above me the day-blind stars waiting with their light. For a time, I rest in the grace of the world and am free.
So